It's always a very tender and very special moment. And today, much more so, I'm quite sure that you are aware that today is Tolerance Day. And I think this is a day that we really need to celebrate, to deepen in our consciousness. And the story which I'm about to tell you would never have happened if we've had Tolerance Day in those days in Europe, where tolerance would be imparted to everyone's life and people would understand it. Because whatever happened to me and to millions and millions of people is because the lack of tolerance and understanding and compassion. The story of my life is not unique. It happened to everyone who was unfortunate to have been born during that time and in that place. Perhaps the best way to make you understand it is to think of it as a tsunami. Our tsunami rose like a wave of hatred which swept over Europe when Nazi Germany took country after country. In my case, I was 15 years old on this beautiful sunny Sunday morning, September 3rd, 1939, when suddenly that wave swept over my childhood home and took away everything I knew and loved. My beloved parents, my brother, my aunts, my uncles, my childhood home, and all my friends. And I found myself on this deserted beach, so to speak, alone except for one childhood friend. But while I talk about the tsunami, all I want to tell you is that this recent horrible tsunami yet provided some comfort because the world took a response. Our country sent 2 of our presidents from opposing parties in one aircraft to reach out in a humanitarian effort. And the world stood by and helped. In our case, nobody was there. The one person was a childhood friend. I've known her almost since I was born because her mother and my mother were friends. And you know, as mothers often do, they feel that children should be friends as well. Even though Ilse was a very lovely, nice little girl, my mother always told me I should be more like her. She played the piano beautifully, she had wonderful manners. My mother said, can't you be like Ilse? So predictably, I never wanted to play with her. But whenever we did, we always had a very nice time. And here then, in the aftermath of this horror, separated from our families, from our homes, sold on the slave markets of Germany to a series of slave labor and concentration camps, we became sisters to each other. I know that you have heard a great deal about the Holocaust, and I'm sure that many of you really sometimes feel I really don't want to hear about all the horror. And I will tell you, I'm not going to speak about the horror. The only thing I'm going to tell you is that no matter what you heard, no matter how unbelievable, it all unfortunately was true. But another dimension lived there, which I feel has never been sufficiently illuminated. And that is the love, the friendship, the sharing and the caring which existed there, which gave one hope for the ultimate goodness of humanity. And since those who perished there left no children behind, you are the spiritual heirs. And you must know of the greatness of the legacy that was left to you and take pride in it. So perhaps if sometimes the going is rough in your own life, just think of someone who might have been born on the same day you were a number of years ago or even now, because unfortunately we still see the Holocaust in many ways is not over. If you go and see what happens, just turn on television tonight, you will still see hungry children, you will see villages that have been burned, people fleeing, the racism, inhumanity, intolerance, which is still visited in so many unfortunate countries to so many people in the world. And since you are the messengers to a time I shall not see, it is my hope that perhaps through understanding my story, not my story now as an 86-year-old grandmother, but the story when I was a young girl, when I was 15, as many of you are, and have lived the story. After being separated from my parents, my brother, who was 5 years older, was the first one to be taken away. I never saw my beloved brother again, nor did I ever see any members of my family. We were sold to slave labor camps in Germany, which later became concentration camps. The work was very hard. People were selected to be killed if you did not do the amount of work or if they were displeased with you. But I always like to think much more how people reached out to each other, and because our time is short, I will very briefly tell you the story of my friend Ilse. As I said, we were like sisters to each other. When things were rough, we tried to comfort each other. We tried to share our meager amounts of food that were given to us, and we were trying to dream and hope that one day we are going to be free. In January of 1945, at this point, of course, the war was already more than 5 years old. As the Germans were losing the war, of course, it became much harsher and worse for us. And as the Allied armies were advancing through Europe, they decided that they should also kill us so that we should not be witnesses to their deeds. And that was in January of 1945, when our orders were to be shipped to Oranienburg, the factories where we worked in Greenberg. Oranienburg was a murder camp near Berlin, such as Auschwitz was in Poland. Blessedly, Oranienburg fell into the hands of the Allies, and we started a march which is in your history books, which is known as the Death March. Ours was not the only march. There were numerous marches throughout Germany in that time, fleeing from the advancing American and British and Soviet armies. In our case, we were 2,000 girls, and to which another 2,000 were added. We were again parted, and we started the march on the 29th of January. On the 29th of April, when we marched outside, we had food not every day, perhaps every second and sometimes every third day. We were eating leaves from the trees, and or in winter the leaves were frozen, and it was very tough, to put it mildly. Most of the girls were dying. My friend Ilse, on the 29th of April, fell very ill. She died in my arms. She was 18 years old. I don't know if I mentioned it, but one day in the camp, on the way to the factory, she had found a raspberry in the gutter. She carried the treasure in her pocket all day long to give it to me on a leaf which she plucked through the barbed wire. Can you imagine a world in which your entire possession is one slightly bruised, dust-covered raspberry, and to give it to a friend? Obviously, she never tasted another raspberry again. In the last bitter hour of her young, unfulfilled life, she gave me the greatest gift of them all, the gift of my own life. For she asked me to promise her to go on for one more week. A week in these days was a very long time. She also said, and one cannot imagine, that she said that she was angry at no one, and she hoped that nobody was angry at her. And then she said, if my parents and Kitty was her little sister, she said, if they survive, don't tell them how I died. They did survive. And I promised her that I'd try to go on for one more week. A week later, exactly to the day of her death, perhaps to the very hour, we were liberated by American forces. And I should like to briefly tell you the story of my liberation. The remaining, we were now a little less than 120 girls from this enormous amount of thousands. Probably one reason that I got that far was that when I left home in June, I left home in June, and my father suddenly said to me, before we were torn apart, he said, "Where are your skiing boots?" We were all avid skiers. And I said, "Why?" And my father said, "I want you to wear them." I said, "Papa, skiing shoes in June? You know, I would have probably gone in a pair of sandals." And my father said, "I want you to wear your skiing boots." And you didn't argue with your father. And I don't know how my father could have foreseen that I'll be wearing those boots for 3 years, and on the death march in the harsh winter, I'm quite sure that those boots really saved my life. I saw girls breaking their toes like twigs because we were so frozen. They were herding us into an empty bicycle factory as we heard American planes overhead and the shooting, obviously, of American artillery close by, and our captors locked us in that factory and attached a time bomb. I'm sure it sounds to you like a cheap thriller. But in a way it was almost like magic, because suddenly it started to rain. A torrential rain which prevented the bomb and timer from connecting, and obviously it never went off. In the morning the doors were thrust open, we heard shouting, "If anyone is there, get out." The war in Europe was over. What does one think in such a moment? I don't think that I could separate the dream of 6 years from reality. I don't remember any emotions at all. Until an onrush of such incredible joy. And I'd like to illuminate this particular moment with you without going much before or after. I stood in the door of that factory and saw from a close by hill a car coming down. This time, thank God, it was not green as the German army was, but on its hood no longer the swastika, but the white star of the American army. There were 2 men in that vehicle. One jumped out, came running toward me. I looked at him, and it was like looking at a young god. I realized that he must be an American, but I didn't know what he's going to do, so I felt I had to tell him what we were always told to do. I said, "We are Jewish, you know." And for a long time he didn't answer me. He was wearing dark glasses, so I couldn't see his expression. And finally, in a voice which betrayed his own emotion, he said, "So am I." And it was the greatest moment to be liberated not only by an American, but by a fellow Jew. And before I recovered, he asked a very strange question. He asked if he could see the other ladies. Of course, in formal address, we had not been addressed. I said to him that most of the girls were inside because I was standing in the doorway, and most of them were already unable to walk. And he said, "Won't you come with me?" And what he did, I didn't understand it. He held the door open for me and let me precede him. And in this beautiful gesture, he restored me to humanity again. I'd like to give you a picture of that moment. I weighed 68 pounds. My hair was white. I was in rags. I was going to be 21 the following day. I had not had a bath in 3 years. And here was this very handsome young American officer in his helmet with a gun on his side, holding the door open for me. By what miracle could I have believed that I'll marry him a year later in Paris, and he will bring me home to this country which I so proudly call my own. I love this country. I love it with a love that only one who has been homeless and hungry for as long as I have been. And all the miraculous things I could never have dreamt about happened when I came here. When I married my beloved husband and he brought me home to what I think is the most beautiful city in the world, more beautiful than Paris or London or New York or what have you. He brought me to Buffalo, New York. Buffalo became my home. This is where my life became the life of a young woman and of a mother, of a member of my community. And this is where I also was able to fulfill my dream of writing my book, my first book, All But My Life. I believe many of you use it in school. And this is where I like to encourage you. Just go ahead and do whatever you want to do. You have unspeakable freedom. You have the greatest opportunity. You know, my school stopped when I was 15, or even a little younger than 15. English is my third language. My first language was German because, you see, the part where I was born, even though it was Poland, had been Austria before the First World War. Consequently, as a small child, I spoke German. And then, of course, I went to Polish schools and learned Polish. And when I came to this country, I had to learn English. And it's now the only language in which I can express myself. You know, it was like magic. If somebody lifted you out of darkness and suddenly you are illuminated by light. You know, freedom is something that you take totally for granted. Freedom is like air, right? You breathe in and you breathe out, and sometimes it smells wonderful, there are flowers, and sometimes it's not so nice, but you can breathe. And you know, what would it be like if you are locked up in a trunk and the lid is closed and you are fighting for every breath, and suddenly the trunk is opened and sunlight streams in. This is what freedom is like. In my case, I've been fortunate, I think, that I was always a dreamer. So, you know, when they told us that if you are going to behave, you can stay here till the rest of your life. And you know, when you are 18 years old and you are told you are behind barbed wire, that they will teach you and you will stay here all your life and all the things. I used to have my dreams, and my dreams were, no, it's not going to be like that. Perhaps I should tell you at this point that in my last camp, we were 2,000 girls. We were always hungry. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire, which was electrically charged. And the easiest thing would have been, you know, to go and kill yourself. I mean, what's going to be here if you're 18 years old and for the rest of your life you'll be in this miserable place. They will wake you up with whips in the morning and make you work building roads. I mean, what's that like? And I think in this, in a way, is the faith. Dream and say things are going to be different. And in my case, fortunately, they were different. But this is why I feel that it is a sacred obligation for me to share with you who blessedly are free, that you should not poison your wonderful years to say, oh, this is bad, or what am I going to do if this happens or this happens? I want to assure you about one thing. The things which you most think are going to happen are not going to happen. And if they happen, there is in each of you an incredible reservoir of strength that you will be able to cope with it. So live your life joyously, share things with others, be cautious naturally, you know, and take things seriously. But as I said, you know, I didn't have any teachers or psychiatrists or psychologists or my beloved parents or anybody around me to tell you what I should do. So I looked back and tried to remember what I was taught. And this became very important to me. I know that my parents were killed in Auschwitz the day after they came there, which was on the 30th of June of 1942, because they keep all those things that my parents were killed then. I don't know what happened to my brother. And I did meet just a couple people, but nobody who has known me before. But some of my friends who were with me in camp, unfortunately very few, I met them in Israel because, there was no place in the world for them to go. After it was over, you couldn't go home. There was no home there. This was always the dream. When it's over, we'll go home to our parents, to our families. And when the war was over, nobody was there. So I did meet a couple, and one of my friends who was in camp with me now lives still in Buffalo, New York. I'm not in Buffalo, now I'm in Phoenix. But I was in Buffalo a few weeks ago and I saw her. And, it feels like your family, somebody who has gone through all the same things you have. And we talk about it and cry together about all the friends that we have lost and all the families. And we rejoice then that we have children and grandchildren, and we have known freedom, this incredible freedom, which thank God you all take for granted. I always wanted to go home, and I did go. I went with my husband and my children. I saw my house, which was in total, was not quite destroyed, but was in a horrible shape. And it was strange, there was a woman there, and I said, this was my house. And she said, no, that's my house. She said, I've lived here for 55 years. And it was true, she's lived there, but I've lived there before. And it was very sad for me to see that everything has been destroyed. And all I wanted to do is get back home to the United States as soon as I could. It was very, very sad going there and not seeing anybody whom I have loved. It would have been different if my brother or my parents, if somebody survived, and we would have gone back. So as far as I'm concerned, my home now is here and always will be here. I had the privilege of working with Columbine High School after the tragedy. It happened many years ago, you cannot remember, but this was the tragedy when those two disturbed boys planned for an entire year how to kill their fellow students and their teachers on Hitler's birthday. It was a horrible tragedy, and I was often in Columbine. But what I learned there, and what the kids and I, what we worked about, is that the pain, because the kids always asked me, will I ever get over it? Will I ever laugh again? And I said, yes, you're never going to get over it. You're never going to forget it. But it's not going to, the pain will lodge in you, not like a heavy stone, but like a little spark. And whenever you'll come against some injustice and see things, the spark is going to arise and will warm you, and you will reach out and do something good. And I think that from every bad experience, you can always learn either what other people have done, it's not right, or to look into somebody's heart and to reach out and understand perhaps a little better somebody else's pain. Pain should not be wasted. Pain can be used to heal.
I just wanted to ask you about Simon Wiesenthal in his book, The Sunflower. He writes about the possibilities and limits of forgiveness. Can you share with us your views on this issue of forgiveness?
This is a very important question. I had the privilege of knowing Simon Wiesenthal. We talked about the story of the sunflower. I remember when he was writing it. He said, he could not give forgiveness to those SS people who asked him to forgive him. You can only ask forgiveness for yourself, but certainly on behalf of those, like my friend Ilse, like my parents, my brother, my little cousins, who were murdered so cruelly, I cannot forgive on their behalf. You have to really go and ask every one of those, have you forgiven? Have you found peace wherever you are? Thanks a lot. Long live the United States of America that has given me all that I have gotten back and never dreamt about.